How's it going? Adam Drake here, and today I want to talk about servicing your shocks. More specifically, how often you should change your shock fluid, and then also maintenance as far as O-rings, guide bushings, things like that. So it really depends on, like with the shocks, I feel like I change the oil more frequently, just because if there's like a big temperature swing, more so than it's necessarily needed or required to have fresh oil. Especially with the Mugen shocks, like most 8-scale shocks, you use a shock boot. And if that shock boot stays intact, doesn't have any holes, doesn't allow dust to get inside the boot and kind of damage the seal pack or the O-rings, then the shock oil will stay clean and clear for a really long time. If it's kind of winter time and the weather's staying really consistent, you may not open up your shocks for a few weeks. Same thing in the summer. If you kind of have a normal schedule where you race, say every Saturday afternoon and the weather's staying really consistent, you may not change your oil very often. Normally with shocks, we're changing the oil because we're chasing that balance or feel due to the change in temperature. But if you do have a shock boot that you notice is ripped and torn, and you're on a really dusty track, it's really important to take the shock off the car, clean behind the boot, put a new boot on, and make sure that you don't have that dust inside the boot that's basically working as sandpaper. It'll scratch the shaft, it'll put little cuts and tears in the O-rings, and also mess up the guide bushings. With that, the oil will no longer be clear. Some of that dirt will get inside, and you can even damage the piston, shock shaft, shock body, kind of the entire shock if you have dirt in there. As far as changing the O-rings, again, if your shock boots stay intact, you can run the Mugen O-rings for a really, really long time. It's never going to hurt if you want to put fresh O-rings. The fresh O-rings will make the shocks just a little bit smoother, a little bit less stiction, so that the suspension can work a little bit better, especially in bumpy conditions. But again, with the Mugen O-rings, you can run them for a really, really long time. A couple months is no problem. It's kind of whatever you want to be your normal routine or maintenance plan. But if there is torn boots, dust and dirt in there, you're going to want to change that much more often. So pay attention to your shock boots. It'll make your shock shafts last longer, the O-rings and guide bushings last longer, and also keep the oil nice and clean. With the oil, it's a little bit different than with your differentials. A lot of times you're changing oil with the shocks, like I said, purely because of the outside temperature. With diffs, you're changing the fluid because of the grip level. If the grip goes up, a lot of times you go up with the diff fluids. If the grip goes down, you go with lighter diff fluids. Where with shocks, we're just chasing the actual ambient temperature. Diffs build a lot of heat themselves naturally because you have the gears internally pushing the fluid, builds heat. With the shocks, not so much. There'll be a little bit of heat buildup from long races, but it's not like the diff. So remember, shock fluid, you're just kind of chasing the temperature. And in some cases, the temperature may change, but the grip level of the track, like say it gets a little bit hotter, you're thinking, man, I should go up a little bit in oil, but maybe the track surface kind of goes away and it's a little bit looser. A lot of times you can have a pretty decent range. I would say that if the temperature changes 5 to 10 degrees, it's maybe not a huge deal to change your shock fluid, but if it's more than that, say a 15 or 20 degree swing, you're going to want to stay on top of that. Flashpoint does make the quarter weight shock oils So here I have 525 and 575. Again, if you just really, really want to stay on top of it, the quarter weights are great, but I would say a kind of more standard or normal change would be if it's a 15 or 20 degree swing in temperature, then you'll want to change your shock oil 50 CST for the different track conditions.